we have Mr. Fritz, which is the foresitter of the Zurich James Joyce Foundation. Is it foresitter the name? Or director?
You have to speak, I don't hear.
Director of the James Joyce Foundation Zurich. Is that the correct name? Director? Yeah. Okay. And then we have Dr. Ashraf Noor. I'm sorry, I just met you today, and I don't know how you want to be introduced apart from your name, Ashraf. Dr. Ashraf Noor. That is also a member of the reading circle, I suppose, of Zurich. So I believe that the Zurich James Joyce Foundation have prepared a little introduction to the text of Joyce and to the possible relation with Lacan. I give you the word, therefore.
I think procedural confusion is a good way to begin speaking about Joyce. So we thought that today we'd begin, we have basically a bridge that we have to gap. We have a gap that we have to bridge between the readers of Joyce and the readers of Lacan. And we thought that we'd begin doing this by looking at a couple of texts concretely to see what problems they pose, what challenges they pose, and to try to find some common ground between the hermeneutic problems of reading Joyce and the manifest hermeneutic problems posed by reading Lacan. Fritz Senn has chosen a few texts which are being beamed here on the screen, and we could begin just by reading them together and asking what questions can be posed with respect to these texts.
Okay, I thought it's good to have a few examples. I thought we would have them later, but now we have this, so people know what we're talking about. We'll soon be lost in generalities, which is also a danger. But that's a good example of how Finnegan's Wake proceeds, that everybody can follow. There are lots of passages where we cannot follow, but that's a good one, and it's somewhere on page 455. If you managed to get to 455, you know the technique of reading, which some of you may not. And it's a very simple thing. We may come, touch and go, from atoms and ifs, but we're pretty surely destined to be odds without ends. So it begins tentatively, we may, but then we are pre-surely. Pre-surely is the only word that isn't standard English, but I think we can more or less guess what it is. It's surely, but not quite surely, because you're sure a little bit too early. And what it is, it says, seems to say, on the one hand, we kind of think about human life. We may come, touch and go. That is our lives. We come, touch, and then go, leave again. From atoms and ifs, we are all consisting of atoms in a kind of scientific way of looking at it. And ifs, these are hypotheses. If something is like that, something else can be deduced. But we are surely destined to be odds without ends. It's like odds and ends, things like that. So that is one thing, a kind of scientific tentative thing about human life. And by the way, human life is touch and go. It's always precarious, you don't know which way it's turning. So that is one way you might say the scientific, rational. And this is overlaid by what I would say the church says. The church says we may come, touch and go, and they know where they come from, that is from Adam and Eve. Now if you knew, that sounds a bit strange, but if you read that far, you did. So our beginning is Adam and Eve in paradise with the fall and all of that. And then in the religious context, you have world without end that we hear here, and that is in Secula Secularum from here now, the Ewigkeit. So you have overlaid a kind of materialistic view and a religious one in kind of conflict. And of course in Joyce's time, when Joyce got that, was very much a conflict. However, that's not the whole story, because when Joyce wrote that, the atom was no longer not divisible atomos. It became, or they talked about it being split. Oddly enough, when the atom becomes split, you don't call it tom, you still call it atom. So even scientists would not be agreed about what it is. And in the religious thing, you have on the one hand the Catholic formula, but predestination is a more Protestant idea. So even on the religious front, you have conflicting ideas. And so that's a good example of what Finnick-Drake does. And you can find more things.
Well, that's a very lucid description of what this text does. What one often finds in Finnegan's Wake is a little thorn in the flesh of the reader. And in my reading of this, the thorn in the flesh of the reader is the apostrophe, to be odds without ends. Now, a typical question that we would ask in the reading group is, how did this apostrophe get smuggled into the apparently relatively clear text? What do we do with this apostrophe? How do we understand it? What does it mean to be odds, belonging to odd, of odd, without ends?
And odd is often gods, of course, then, yeah? Mm-hmm. So on the one hand you have order, divine supervision or whatever. On the other hand you have chaos, odds, and ends. And Finnick-Drake is often a kind of imbalance between, on the one hand, chaos, confusion, that's what it is, and until we find out some kind of order, that structure that's behind it, which is never complete. And there's usually something left over, and you can still guess here in many ways. And of course, Finnegan's Wake is indeed without ends, because it doesn't end, it ends on the one word, which can never come at the end, it's definitive article, along that. And after that, something else must come, and then you go to the beginning. So Finnegan's Wake is also odd and has no ends. Finnegan's Wake is also a narcissistic text. It often talks about itself, among other things.
Perhaps we should ask preliminary questions or comments before we continue.
Yes, I wanted just to say something, perhaps to introduce Michael Schmidt. Perhaps, I suppose you have noticed that the title of the film is The Joycean Society. So the subject of the film is not exactly the Finnegan's Wake, and it's not exactly the text of Finnegan's Wake, but although you may have noticed as well that there's an enormous presence of the text and of the reading of the text. But the subject of the film is the Joycean Society, so that means that people that are together, are bound together by a text, by the Finnegan's Wake text or by James Joyce's writings. So in this case, perhaps I think it would be nice if now I give the word to Michael Schmidt, because of course when I came to Bregenz, I encountered by coincidence a sign on one of the walls saying Lacan Archiv. And then I was surprised, as always, in a 27,000 inhabitant city to find a Lacan Archiv in such a casual manner. And then I even was more surprised to find out that the purpose of the Lacan Archiv was, and also that this as well was a place where people were bound together by a text. And therefore I think it would be maybe nice if you can explain something about the Lacan Archiv and the text, and then go on with the relation of Lacan with Joyce.
Guten Abend, ich möchte mich erst entschuldigen, dass ich Deutsch spreche, weil ich mir nicht zutraue, die Unterhaltung auf Englisch zu machen. Die Begegnung mit Dora García hat uns ebenso überrascht, wie Dora García überrascht war, dass es übrigens eine Lacan-Gruppe gibt. Wir erleben das immer wieder, dass man sich völlig konsterniert zeigt, dass in einem Ort wie Bregenz, es ein Lacan-Archiv gibt. Jetzt geht's wieder. Bregenz. Das hat mit den Personen zu tun, die hier in Bregenz leben oder hier aus Bregenz stammen. Im Jahr 1980 haben wir hier in Bregenz begonnen mit einer kleinen Gruppe, die begonnen hat, ein französisches Seminar von Jacques Lacan mit dem Titel Identifikation zu lesen. Und weil es damals mir und auch anderen nicht gegeben war, so gut mit dem Französischen zurechtzukommen, hatten wir das Glück, dass eine Französischlehrerin vom Gymnasium, eine Französischprofessorin, bereit war, mit uns diese Texte zu lesen und sie sozusagen ähnlich wie die Joyce-Gruppe in Zürich beim Lesen zu übersetzen. Das war für uns der erste Zugang als Gruppe zu Lacan und seither lesen wir das ganze Jahr über, unterbrochen durch die Sommerferien, alle 14 Tage irgendein Seminar von Lacan. Anders als die Joyce-Gruppe in Zürich sind wir nicht 11 oder 12 Jahre und immer wieder mit demselben Text befasst, sondern Lacan hat 24 mündlich gehaltene Seminare hinterlassen, die entweder auf Tonband aufgezeichnet oder stenografiert worden sind und die nach und nach in offizieller Publikation in Frankreich erscheinen, aber immer schon als Mitschriften und Raubdrucke bestanden haben und anhand dieser Raubdrucke haben wir uns an Lacan herangemacht. Diese 24 Seminare sind sozusagen in einer Folge von 1953 bis 1979 etwa. Wir lesen diese Seminare nicht in dieser Reihenfolge, sondern je nach Interesse von einem bestimmten Gesichtspunkt ausgehend jedes Mal neu. Ist ähnlich wie bei der Joyce-Gruppe in Zürich. Es gibt einen Stamm von 3 Personen, die seit 1980 zusammenkommen und Lacan-Texte lesen. Es kommen neue Leute hinzu, die bleiben eine Zeit lang dabei, hören wieder auf, kommen später wieder dazu, sodass wir in einer ähnlichen Situation wie die Joyce-Gruppe in Zürich in unterschiedlicher Zusammensetzung, aber in großer Beharrlichkeit und mit einer nicht enden wollenden Ausdauer an diesen Texten arbeiten. Ich hätte, wie Fritz Senn, gesagt, dass es so etwas gibt wie einen Suchtfaktor in der Lektüre Lacans, das eben genau mit dem zu tun hat, dass man nicht in seinem Verstehen, in seinem Wunsch zu verstehen, brüskiert wird und sozusagen umgeleitet wird auf die Spuren der Sprache und sich auf die Sprache selbst einzulassen und Abstand zu nehmen vom Zwang zu verstehen, entsteht dieser Flow, dieser Suchtcharakter, diese Form des Genießens, die sonst auf keine andere Weise zur Verfügung steht.
To lead to a... Doesn't really... Okay. Another thing you may have noticed in the film, you have a tryout to make a parallel between how the text of Joyce is read and how it was written. So in this it was Professor Gerd Renaud from Antwerpen is showing the manuscripts, what is called the Buffalo Notebooks, and he's going over how the words were chosen and how they were transcribed and repeated from one text to the other. So to me it is quite remarkable the way it is not only that these texts are read in a group, but also how they are read and how they are discussed and how there is especially very singular is that there is not a hierarchy of opinions. There is not someone who has the right way to read it and someone who, other group of people that accept this master way of reading, but there is a real discussion trying to find a sense in it, and there is a lot of joy, the pun not intended, as you can see in the film, when it starts, before even they started in the text, and they make this series of anecdotes on Damian Hirst, and this series of anecdotes on how you prove that somebody's dead. It is not only the reading of the text, but there is also a big joy and a big satisfaction on the reading of the text. It's a joyful experience. So I would perhaps, if you could just go through the text or through the samples that you have brought of the text, and just try to explain a little bit how it is read in public and together. Perhaps orientate a little bit about how the mechanics of reading go with the wake.
Joyce speaks of the chaosmos, and I think that you've got a microcosm, a microcosmos in the Finnegan's Wake reading group. Now, I think it's always a question of the relative authority of a reading, and I think that I would disagree with you on one point. I think that there is some sort of, there's always the attempt to reach something that we can commonly agree upon as being roughly the meaning of a passage. It definitely isn't the case that there's just a proliferation of standpoints that are not in some way mediated at some point. So it's not a question of mere joy at the proliferation of signs or the proliferation of enunciations, but without specifying, without posing an ultimate reading, there's certainly some sort of a common effort to reach a consensus of some type with regard to the meaning of the text. Well, I think it's asymptotic, to use a Kantian analogy. I don't think it will ever be reached. That's the point of it being words without end, worlds without end. But there is something that you share in speaking about the text, which is in some way directed towards a common meaning. I don't know if you agree with that.
I don't know. I'd like to come back to the documentary film. It's always very strange when you see yourself in a film and see what we're doing. You also did something before we began. This is called filming below the belt, and it's quite odd what we do. And the passages we had were not very good ones. We couldn't, not like this one, which is relatively easy, and we didn't do too well. And an interesting thing is, if you don't understand it, or if you seem to understand something, you go on, but if you don't, you spend a lot of time looking for all kinds of different things, whether they make sense or not. And the other thing is, these reading groups have an interesting kind of dynamics. And it's not easy to be at the switchboard, because there's always a kind of conflict between freedom of speech and the minimum of relevance. And you don't quite know when to step in and what to say. And the reading, though, by the way, ours is an amateur group, but the professional groups are more or less the same thing. They proceed the same, only with a higher level of education. And for me, it's always interesting. I would like to go from what seems to be obvious to what is more peripheral, but it never works. People just go for what they think they see and say it, and I was at first long time very annoyed by the lack of discipline, because though Finnegan's Wake looks confusing, this is not typical, it looks confusing, you saw some of it in the film, and the discussion of it should not be entirely confusing, but should have a kind of order, and I would like to go from the important, the central, to the peripheral. The trouble is Finnegan's Wake doesn't easily distinguish between the two, and there's a lot of crosstalk. Everybody looks at the passage, thinks, and somebody's always speaking. So a lot of what is being said is not heard, because the brain is touched in a particular particularly strong way. And we have quite different success. Some of, as I say, by chance, when you came, we weren't doing too well. Joyce wasn't doing too well, by the way, so wasn't us. And so it's different. And as I think I also quoted here, sometimes you get great experiences. I always like this one, for example, the super way. And sometimes we seem to be puzzled. And Joyce, in a way, is very democratic. He puts us all in the same boat of shared ignorance. And we try to get from this and convert it into a little bit, a minimum of life and insight.
So I had to smile when you said that I was in a bad day there. One has to understand that I have 11 years to choose from to try to fall into the right moment, into the right passage of the book. I was, of course, there were limitations of due to how complicated it is to film, even with a very small crew. There is nevertheless, as you have seen, there is a soundman, and then there is a cameraman, and this is always complicated and expensive to move. Therefore, I filmed 3 days, and in the end, I decided to choose for the last day, even if there were very wonderful moments in the other two readings, but it had to be chosen for a certain coherence of image and color and these kind of things that are besides the text. But nevertheless, I don't think you can really, I wouldn't say that you can get one fragment better than the other. And of course, it is not chaotic, the text, and it is also not chaotic, the discussion of it. I appreciate it very much that in some festivals that the film has been shown, they say that it was something like a square circle. It was a joyful, highbrow entertainment, in the sense that it would seem impossible to make a very enjoyable film that is about a text that most readers understand as very arid and very difficult to follow. So in that sense, I was very especially touched by the joy that I could feel in the interpretation of the text. Plus, all the ideas I got about the text, I got them from readers of the text. So as much from the group as from the Gerlernaut or the group of Trieste, that was as well illuminating me a bit through the text. I don't know if you want to go through other part of the text.
We could possibly look at another text and then move on to discussion.
I'd like to throw in something else. Most of you have probably been at the Kunsthaus, and I was there today, and it was quite interesting the kind of similarities we have. In the first place, we have all kind of multimedial performances, but when you go up to the room, at first you come in, you get dizzy from an abundance of light. In Joyce you also get dizzy, but not because there's too much light, it's something else. And then it was interesting that this kind of floor where you step on the text, and it's in very clear capital letters, but you can't see much. You only can see around where you stand, and you don't get the context. That's a bit like reading Finnegan's Wake. It's like driving at night. You see a little bit ahead, but not very far, and you forget what is behind you. So there's a kind of similarity, with the difference that the floor in the Kunsthaus makes sense. If you really go slowly, you can find out what it is. That's not true of Joyce. And on another floor, there was this Kafka sense where you have to turn, and yet another one has various pictures, film, and spoken words and written words, and it's a kind of confusion too, and that's in a way true also of Finnegan's Wake. One equivalent could be biographical. Joyce was in Trieste, in Austrian Trieste at the time, where there were many different cultures and languages, German, Italian, Slovakian, Hungarian and all of that. And if you were in a public place and somebody spoke, for a few moments you might not know what kind of language they're speaking in, and the same thing can happen in film trick. So I want to, before we go on, to point out certain similarities and how, in a way, fitting it is that we have this exhibition and this event here. In some way they go together, in a way, the connecting point that's you. Yeah. Well, I think before, I'd like to, since we have Lacan, as a kind of interface between Jacques Lacan and Joyce, and I think it would have happened anyway, but we owe it to one particular Joyce scholar, Jacques Aubert, a good friend, who in the 70s certainly talked to me about some French psychologist or whatever by the name of Jacques Lacan, and he thought that Lacan's approach would be something, and it was possible then to invite Lacan to our symposium. We do that every 2 years, in 75 in Paris, and there in June 19, Jacques Lacan appeared in the Sorbonne, which in itself was a sensation. I didn't get the background. I think there had been splits in the and he talked for a long time to a very packed audience. I was quite interested. I took some pictures. I didn't understand the word. I didn't know. And he made long pauses. He stopped for 6 seconds. That's an eternity when you're sitting there. And it was an interesting performance. And then the result. That was these seminars, which I think were quite fruitful in many respects.
I think we have the possibility of continuing with the text or trying to establish some sort of systematic, if you like, connection between Joyce and Lacan, because I think this is what you are here for, and what would interest me in speaking with the Lacanians here is there are various levels on which Lacan speaks of Joyce in this text, Le Sinthome, some more general, some more specific. Perhaps we could start with something very general, which is that of heresy and of truth. Lacan says at a certain time, il faut choisir la voie par où prendre la vérité, with respect to this question of heresy, which he says, this is the way he introduces Joyce in the text, this is what connects Joyce with me. Now, is this just some sort of biographical statement on his part, or is he saying something about also vérité?
Ich möchte gern, weil Sie das auch angesprochen haben, kurz erwähnen, was Lacan bei diesem Vortrag in Paris gesagt hat, bei dem Joyce-Symposium. Seine persönlichen Beziehungen zu Joyce. Lacan hat damals gesagt, aus einem ziemlich erbärmlichen Milieu kommend, genau gesagt aus dem Stanislas, ein Priesterkind, nicht wahr, wie Joyce, aber ein Kind von Priestern, die weniger seriös waren als die seinen, die Jesuiten waren, weiß Gott, was er daraus zu machen gewusst hat. Kurz, aus diesem erbärmlichen Milieu auftauchend, bin ich mit 17 Jahren, dank der Tatsache, dass ich bei Adrien Monnier ein- und ausging, Joyce begegnet. Genauso wie ich, als ich 20 war, der ersten Lesung der französischen Übersetzung, die von Ulysses erschienen war, beigewohnt habe. Es gibt also einen persönlichen Bezug, den Lacan zu Joyce hat, aber es gibt natürlich auch einen, wenn man so sagen darf, wissenschaftlichen Bezug, den Lacan, der ja Psychiater und Psychoanalytiker war, hatte, indem er auf der Basis der Psychoanalyse Freuds herausgearbeitet hat, die Fundierung des Unbewussten, so wie Freud es sich gedacht hat, als einer Struktur, die analog einer Sprache organisiert wäre. Und wenn man das Unbewusste in diesem Sinne betrachtet, wie Lacan das getan hat, dann kann man in etwa nachvollziehen, was Sie eingangs gesagt hatten, dass in dem Film, dass die Teilnahme an der Lektüregruppe eine Art Gruppentherapie wäre. Das kann man insofern nachvollziehen, wenn man sozusagen die Bedeutung des Sprechens und der Erfahrung der Sprache als einen therapeutischen Effekt betrachtet. Und das ist insofern das Zentrum dessen, was Lacan versucht hat herauszuarbeiten. Und der Bezug zu Joyce ist ja in den Jahren nach 1975 zum Zentrum seiner weiteren Lehre geworden, als er sich in die Topologie begeben hat, in die Theorie der Knoten, um sozusagen ausgehend von der Konzeption der Psychose darstellen zu können, die Bedeutung des, anders gesagt, nicht die Bedeutung, sondern ein Instrumentarium zu bekommen, um zeigen zu können, wie die Sprache das menschliche Subjekt strukturiert und welche Auswirkungen und Wirkungen die Sprache auf das menschliche Subjekt haben. Und der Zugang zu Joyce führt ihn in eine Position, die er schon im Zusammenhang mit früheren Theoriekonzepten dargestellt hat, dass in der Psychose etwas passiert, das sich unterscheidet von dem, was im neurotischen Geschehen passiert und das man in den sprachlichen Produktionen nachvollziehen kann. Und insbesondere die Lektüre von Finnegans Wake ist für Lacan ein Beispiel dafür, sozusagen in den Tiefen der Sprache, die er die Muttersprache oder la langue nennt, sich etwas herauskristallisiert, etwas bildet, was sozusagen für den Psychotiker einen Anker für sein Sprechen gibt und damit einen Bezugspunkt, dass er aus dem Treiben und aus den Wirren der Sprache eine Orientierung findet. Und so gesehen ist die Lektüre von Finnegans Wake die Lektüre eines Analytikers, die Lektüre eines Mannes, der an der Theorie der Psychose interessiert ist und von daher den Text natürlich auf eine bestimmte Weise und unter einem bestimmten Gesichtspunkt liest.
Joyce hat ja auch, finde ich, irgendwie erklärt, gerechtfertigt, dass es eben um die Nacht geht. Er hat es mit dem Traum in Verbindung gebracht, also wo das Bewusstsein nicht mehr da ist, die Kontrolle, all das oder unbewusst und alles ist dann sehr in der Nähe der Psychologie ohne weiteres. Nun, Finnegans Wake ist, wie ich gesagt habe und wie man auch gleich merkt, ärgerlich. Man stößt an die Grenzen dessen, was man weiß. Und wir sind ja, die Menschen sind semantogenetische Tiere. Wir wollen, dass Sprache eine Bedeutung hat. Das ist ihre Funktion und hier sind wir sehr oft frustriert. Andererseits ist Finnegans Wake ein Ort, wo es nichts ausmacht, wenn wir es nicht verstehen. Wir haben alle Entschuldigung, es nicht zu verstehen. Ich will nochmal über unsere Lesegruppe und andere Lesegruppen, die es überall gibt, es wird niemand gezwungen, es kommen Leute freiwillig, die kommen von weit her, opfern eine Menge Zeit. Warum? Um einen schwierigen Text nicht ganz zu verstehen. Es ist eine eigenartige Perversion, aber offenes, und wie ich mal gesagt habe, wir fingen an vor langen Jahren, wenn niemand mehr kommt, hören wir auf. Aber es hat eine gewisse Anziehungskraft. Irgendetwas ist da, was vermutlich ein Drang zum Erforschen, etwas herausfinden. Und wir sind dann sehr glücklich, wenn wir etwas haben. Wie etwa im ersten Beispiel, wenn man plötzlich draufsteht, Atoms and Ifs, aha, Adam and Eve, und in dem Moment geht die ganze religiöse Dimension auf. Und weil wir es jetzt schon da haben, eine längere, das Buch heißt ja Finnegans Wake. Wird meistens falsch geschrieben, weil Finnegan, Apostroph S, Wake eine Ballade ist, eine irische Ballade. Finnegans Wake hat aber diesen Apostroph nicht. Es heißt also nicht nur The Wake, das ist eine Totenfeier in Irland, in Anwesenheit der Leiche, sondern es heißt eben auch die Finnegans, die wachen, erwachen, also schon syntaktisch in zwei Überlappen. Und nun in dieser Passage, die sich sehr eignet, um das Ganze einzuführen, kommt das nun vor. Ich lese noch ein bisschen und dann Scheiße, I should say, cool, or why did you die? Das ist die Totenwache und es wird geklagt, warum bist du gestorben? On a trying thirsty morning. Jetzt machen wir es aber so, gehen wir zum nächsten über. Jetzt geht. Ja, hier können wir die Sätze einzeln nehmen, sonst ist es verwirrend, nicht? Nur um zu suchen. On a trying thirsty morning, man sieht es fast nicht mehr, also es ist ein anspruchsvoller Thursday morning, also Donnerstagmorgen ist aber auch Thursday morning, denn es wird natürlich getrunken. Und morning kombiniert im Englischen morning mit Trauern, morning. Das ist ungefähr die Vorgehensweise durch Annäherung oder semantische Elastizität. Jetzt spreche ich plötzlich Deutsch. There's something about Finnegan's Wake, as you can see, it translates itself. As you can see, ifs and also it's Adam and Eve, and other. So we can all follow. Anyway, and then it said, sobs they sided. Sigh and sob, the morning at Finnegan's Christmas Wake. It's with Finnegan's Wake wird Chris fill again. Die Gläser werden wieder gefüllt. Dann Chris or Miss Wake, das klingt so wie Hit or Miss. Man trifft oder trifft nicht. So lesen wir auch. Was wir herausfinden und erraten, ist entweder im Ziel oder im Daneben, Hit or Miss, aber es klingt auch wie Christmas. Und da ist ein anderes Lied überlagert, Mrs. Hooligans Christmas Cake. Ist auch da. Die Melodie könnte man dann auch hören. And all the hooligans of the nation, all the hooligans of the nation. Und dann gibt es diese Wiederholung von Asian Words. Prostrate in der Constellation, der Tour ist eine Profusion of ululation. Ululation sind Klagelieder. Man klagt um einen Toten. Plethora ist ein irisches Wort, heißt eine Menge. Ja, und dann, there were plums and grooms and cherries and citrus and raisins and cinnamon too. Klingt wie etwas. Da könnte man jetzt herausfinden, es gab groom, lassen wir das erste plumbers, grooms, like bridegroom, and sheriffs, and sitters, people who play the sitar, and raiders, those who raid, and cinnamon too, that sind Leute, that are people who make a film about Finnegan's Wake, that kind of thing. So that is one meaning, but in the song, Mrs. Hooligans Christmas Cake, werden die, confused. In the song, you have the ingredients of the cake, and the ingredients are plums and prunes and cherries and citrons and raisins and cinnamon too. So it is both those present at the wake and also the ingredients of the cake. And then it goes on, and they all joined in with a shout, most joviality. That's another song, about another part where it says, and they all joined in with the utmost joviality. They all joined in with the utmost joviality. And here now is this, and they all joined in. The first book is about giants, that's another dimension. It's the history of mankind according to Vico and that kind of thing. Joined in with a shoutmost joviality. They are shouting and shoving and all of that. So that's a variant of the song. Agog and the round of the Magog. is something of a confusion. I'm all agog is an English thing, and there's obviously grog. And Gog and Magog are also figures in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that we can't go there. And then the continuation of that celebration, Heiligen's extermination, continues the other one, all these Asian words. They're also the echo of a book about Finnegan's Wake, before Finnegan's Wake was finished, where Joyce enlisted 12 people who had to write about it, and they called it something like that with these Asian words. Then some in Kinken chorus, more tang keening. I don't quite get that entirely. Keening is the Irish death lamentation. When somebody dies, Irish women are supposed to keen, a kind of death wailing and that kind of thing. It looks like it's also the king, König and things like that, doesn't die and all. And there may be a touch of Concon of the funny dance. Then belling him up and filling him down, they put him on some kind of something bag or whatever, and filling him down, up and down. I don't quite get it, but the next thing then, he's stiff but he's steady as Priam or limb. He is stiff but steady, he's enduring, solid, but stiff is also dead. He's stiff, and then it's Priam or Lynn. That's an Irish song about Brian or Lynn. And here it's turning to Priam or Lynn is long ago in Latin, and Priam is the king of Troy. So you get back into antiquity and all of that. And now we go a little bit on. And then they say, "'Twas he was a decent gay labourer. He was a decent person." That's another song, the decent gay labouring youth or something like that. And then sharpen his pillow comb, tap up his beer, put him on a pillow and tap in his beer. The beer, spelled differently, is also where you carry the dead, the beer, and that's an old joke, of course, in Ireland. It was a great funeral. It took 6 men to carry the beer. That's that kind of, yeah. And you have the pillow stone is something from the Bible and all of that. You have a lot. And then, everywhere in this world would you hear such a din again? Where would you hear such a noise again in the world? A world that is turning around in a whirl and a war. And of course, such a din again is the echo of Finnegan. So the song is there. And then with their deep brow fundigs and their dusty fidelios. So there is deep brows when you're cast down, when you're sad. At the same time, fun is there, and dusty fidelios. At a certain time, you would find out deep brow fundigs de profundis. That's a song, and out of the depth of my misery I call to the Lord. It's also something that you have when you die. And then the dusty fidelios, if the first thing is Latin, the second one can be, and a Christmas song says, Adeste fidelis, you faithful come here. So one refers to death, the other refers to the birth of Christ. Whatever, Fidelio is also an opera. I don't know how this fits in, by the way. Yeah. And then with the apocalypse of Finnegan for his feet and the barrel of Genesis for his head. That is the song in Finnegan's Wake. They put him there with a bottle of whiskey before his feet and a barrel of Guinnesses over his head. So this is the drink. That is the ballad Finnegan's Wake begins with morning, starts with goes on to drinking, and then they fight. And then the dead man is resurrected again by whiskey. Whiskey means the water of life. So that is the plot. But you also see barrel of Guinness has always in Dublin joke brought together with Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. The last book of the Bible is Apocalypse, with Apocalypse of Whiskey. At the end is Apocalypse, and at the beginning is Genesis. But here the end comes before the beginning. And then the last thing is again another ballad, the tootle of the flute and the twiddle of the fiddle, or things like that. That is a very rough run through it. A lot we still don't get, but it shows that the text is also alive with melody, and in a way we can play the melody and you hear it. Joyce is also full of songs and all of that. So that, I think, to me is a relatively easy example of how we proceed. And again, I have to admit, as an old hand at the game, certain things I could still not know. And you could all find out more stuff about that. And you could spend a lot of time over something like that.
This is an example of the virtuosity of the person who leads his reading group in Zurich, to whom we're always very grateful. I'd like to link this, what Fritz has just said, back to our Lacanians here. You put in very general terms what the interest was of Lacan in Joyce, and I'd like to press you a little bit on this. And what we have here is a murmury. The language is murmuring, but it's also about memory. Murmury is a memory, and Lacan makes something of this remembrance in the text which you translated, you've had translated, and which you've discussed in your particular group, and refers that to language and to the way that individual unconscious relates to language. Could you take this particularization on my part of your very general account of what interested Lacan in Joyce, and give us some examples of how he works with this témoignage, mémoire, remémoration, with respect to language. You put it in very general terms. I'm trying to press you and trying to, because quite frankly, some of the things that Lacan says with respect to Joyce, one could say with respect to great literature in general. It isn't always clear to me why specifically Joyce.
Ich weiß nicht, ob ich Ihren Ansprüchen genügen kann mit Ihrer Frage, aber ich denke, warum genau Joyce hängt mit dem Interesse Lacans an der Sprache zusammen. Und Lacans Interesse an der Sprache bezieht sich auf die Frage, inwiefern sozusagen die Sprache als eine Struktur des Unbewussten aufgefasst werden kann. Und in diesem Sinne verliert sozusagen die Sprache die Ebene dessen, das Nennen und Benennen und der Begrifflichkeit nennen könnte, und begibt sich auf die Ebene dessen, was Lacan die Äquivoke nennt, die Äquivokationen, die zusammenhängen mit der Interferenz von Geschriebenen und Gesprochenen. Und das entdeckt Lacan in Finnegans Way insbesondere. Diese Äquivokation, die Interferenz von Geschriebenen und Gesprochenen. Das ist ein Zugang zu dieser Frage. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich...
Ja. It still isn't clear to me why that shouldn't apply also to someone like Celan. Why specifically Joyce? And in this text, the Sinthome, he makes big claims for what he's doing with Joyce. In your opinion, having translated this text and discussed it in your group, do you think that he actually makes something concrete out of his references to Joyce here? What is it that is specifically so important to him about Joyce and not others, on the basis of this?
Also ich würde sagen, dass der Bezug auf Finnegan's Wake und nicht auf andere Literaten eben der Frage des Spiels der Worte zusammenhängt. Das Spiel der Worte, das ist ja das, worauf sich Lacan selbst in dem Seminar Sinthome und in späteren Seminaren einlässt, wo er manchmal vielleicht sehr forciert versucht, Joyce insbesondere zu imitieren, aber es ist ein sehr konkreter und beharrlicher Weg, den er verfolgt und an dem er sich entlanghangelt, sozusagen ein Verständnis von Sprache zu entwickeln, das nur so bei Finnegan's Wake zu sehen ist und nicht bei anderen Literaten. Lacan sagt an einer Stelle, dass es sich bei Finnegan's Wake um einen Traum handelt und dass dieser Traum in einem gewissen Sinne einerseits nicht endet, aber andererseits doch zu Ende gebracht worden ist. Sodass diese spezifische Erfahrung mit der Sprache, das ist, was zumindest Lacan nur in Finnegan's Wake findet.
Okay, perhaps this is something that Max Kleinman could give some ideas on, but I just wanted to say briefly, because I met Jacobert, and then he explained, well, he was telling me a bit about this relation of Lacan and Joyce. In his opinion, Lacan was looking for Joyce without knowing that he was going to find in Joyce what he was looking for. If I remember well, because I didn't prepare all my dates, I think he had written littéraire before he did this seminar, and in littéraire, many of the things he was going to say about Joyce were already contained, and when Jacobert was very close to Lacan, followed the ideas of Lacan, then he just said, well, all this you have to read Joyce, and then you're going to find really the model that you're looking for. Perhaps you would like to say something, because I was especially impressed about your Joycean puns in Lacan.
Als Sie gefragt haben, wo die Verbindung ist, haben Sie angefangen mit der Häresie. Also da den Vergleich zu ziehen. Und ich kann mir gut vorstellen, dass diese heretische okay. Das ist ein heretische Aspekt an der Sprache, das ist, und ihn dazu gebracht hat, mit Joyce sich mehr zu beschäftigen. Abgesehen von diesen historischen Gründen über Jacobert und die Verbindungen, die früher schon angesprochen worden sind. Aber es ist, denke ich, diese Sprache, beziehungsweise die Spaltung der Sprache in eine heretische und eine, man könnte eben sagen, orthodoxe Verwendung von Sprache, die Lacan bei Joyce und vor allem bei Finnegan's Wake eben meint wiederzufinden, vor allem die heretische Seite eben. Also diese Wahl des eigenen Weges, was er auch sagt, es geht darum, bis ans Ende zu gehen. Also jusqu'au bout du réel, und denke, das versucht er oder denkt er hier zu finden.
Yes, I think it was radicality. The radicality of Joyce could not be found in any other writer, and I think this is what Lacan was looking for. I mean, I know there are some, how to say, Lacan that does not contain all of Joyce, but he looked at an interesting side of it. I don't know, because since we are so much pressure, if somebody wants to add something, or there is a question that wants to be asked, perhaps this is the moment, because as you know, there is Venus in first coming at 8 and we have to leave before that. Would you like to add something, or is there a question? Because we have about 10 minutes. Would you like to answer?
Soll ich auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch? Also ich bin mit Ihnen einverstanden. Das Problem ist, dass Ihre Bestimmungen, so verständlich sie mir sind, sehr allgemeine sind. Ich verstehe nicht ganz, inwiefern das, was Sie jetzt gesagt haben, sich nicht auch auf andere exponierte Werke der literarischen Moderne anwenden ließen. Ich hatte Celan genannt, also man könnte ein ähnliches Verhältnis zwischen Normativität und Abweichung oder Häresie bei einem solchen Schriftsteller, Dichter feststellen. Es geht mir darum, das Spezifische des Verhältnisses Lacans zu Joyce herauszustellen.
Ein Aspekt, der, denke ich, Lacan auch sehr interessiert hat, neben dem Verhältnis zur Sprache, ist, was du, Michael, auch angesprochen hast, die Frage der Psychose. In diesem Seminar wird immer wieder deutlich, dass Lacan sehr interessiert ist, von Jacobert auch zu erfahren, wie nah Joyce an der Psychose selbst als Person gewesen ist. Und die Theorie des Symptoms, die Lacan ja versucht zu entwickeln, anhand von Joyce, versucht ja sozusagen darzustellen, wie ein Subjekt, jemand, der eventuell sonst in die Psychose gleiten würde, durch diese Art des Zugangs zum Sprechen und zur Sprache gerade das nicht wird, eben nicht psychotisch wird, sondern ein Kunstwerk schafft. Vielleicht gibt es auch andere Künstler, auf die das auch noch zutreffen würde, aber das sind so einige Aspekte, die eben für Lacans Interesse in der Zeit sehr schön gepasst haben. Und dann vermute ich, kam in Joyce, wie er von borromäischen Noten aus sagt, zurecht wie, oder zu Pass wie der Ring an den Finger. Also es passte gerade in der Zeit.
What can we do if it?
I may not be the only one who is a little bit uncomfortable when the topic is language, die Sprache, and you say something about it. You can hardly say something about it that's completely wrong. So I'm not so comfortable. But there's one common thing, because Lacan and Joyce said, even I see, and that is Lacan, like Joyce, made word combinations. He invented his word, and the word Sinthome is one of them. Which I think in Paris 40 years ago was spelled a bit differently still, as far as I remember. And now what, can you explain what it means apart from symptom, sin perhaps, and can you take it apart, that word?
Yes, please.
You see, for me language is always one particular thing in language, not the whole.
Symptom ist auch etwas eben nicht Unspaltbares, kein Atom, sondern es ist etwas, was eben sich aufspalten lässt, und vor allem über das, also Lacan zieht da einige Wurzeln daraus. Einmal das englische Sin, die Sünde, dann den deutschen Sinn, der Sinn im Gegensatz zur Bedeutung. Dann gibt es le Sinthome, also das Äquivok, der heilige Mann, den er zusammenbringt im Titel des Vortrages Joyce le Sinthome, Joyce der heilige Mann. Weiter geht es zum heiligen Thomas von Aquin, le Sinthome d'Aquin, Sinthome d'Aquin, sagt er auch, und zum Home Rule, Sinthome Rule bildet er. Außerdem Sinthome Rouleau Also das sind die Ausdrücke, die im Sinthome-Seminar enthalten sind und von Lacan rausgeholt werden. Sinn Fein, hatte ich noch vermutet, ist auch durchaus enthalten.
Yes, does anyone have a question?
You mentioned before the similarity, there may be similarity or that you could do with the text of Senn, the same thing as with Lacan. My question is, can you compare the type of temporality in these two productions in a same way, or is maybe the point of temporality very different in Lacan and Joyce than in Senn? It seems to me that the language in Finnegan's Wake asks from language to do in the same time different things. It's not only about depth, it's not only about signification and open that in depth. It's like a transversality in language. And in Lacan, he was very interested what the Unbewusste would do in a temporality with the reality or with the situation that a human being is in it. And he could construct a new temporal model of language. So how could you compare Senn and Joyce in this way?
Well, I'll try. I think that I prefaced what I said by speaking about murmuring and memory. And I think that you have quite clearly in Senn a relationship between language and memory. I think that part of the construction that goes on in his poetry is an attempt to enact rememoration, obviously of the mother in his early poetry, but in his later poetry, of history, of suffering, of passion. Passion as being that level at which things happen to you before there is some sort of concretization of the self. And I think this is the level as Senn began in his first words tonight. He began speaking about that primordial level at which language takes place before there's some sort of concretization of a self. I think that you find that also in Senn. But I mean, it's not a question of my saying there's also A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's a question of whether what is actually at stake in Lacan's interest in Joyce is something that you find in the literature of modernity and of high modernity as a problem. And Joyce may be just the most dramatic example of this. Senn would fit into that reading on my part. We'd have to continue speaking about it. Temporality is an extremely complex problem. But my approach to this would be murmury and memory.
I'll just think about memory, that's the one thing I heard. And of course, reading Finnegan's Wake depends entirely on our individual, cultural, collective memory. It's not that when you hear Adam and Eve, you know something. If you've never heard of it, you're lost. If you never know these Irish songs that I mentioned, then you're lost. You can probably hear some kind of rhythm or something like that. And the other thing, and that's something, that thing in Paris where I didn't understand anything, but I don't think there was any mention, any suspicion that Lacan said that the damn thing could be funny. That didn't come out, but it comes out in Finnegan's Wake, and that's actually what brings people there from a distance, because even if you don't understand it, and you felt it probably, it is quite amusing. There is often a kind of drive, a kind of rhythm in the language that appeals to us. Often it is like it touches some chords that we can't quite bring to mind, but it's something like old archetypal memories or something like that. It is fun. After all, there is lots of fun. And I'd like to end, and I think we come to the end pretty soon, pointing out another paradox. There's probably nothing that goes beyond Finnegan's Wake. You can't overdo that kind of thing of piling meaning on each other and having different languages and nonsense and all of that. It's probably hard to do. It was the most avant-garde thing. Imagine Beckett went the other way. Instead of adding, taking away, until there's nothing there. And of course, Finnegan's Wake also occupies the best mind, and Lacan was one of the best minds, and all of that. So what I want to say, it is very much ahead. It's progressive. At the same time, what the reading groups do is really a medieval thing. When people sit together about one text and try to find out what it is. In the old times, it was holy texts. We have a different, and of course, there's a touch of religion there too about this. We have our high priest and all of that, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. Joyce is a good antidote to that. You can't be too pompous because it's always undercut. So there's that. But I just want to say it has also a social function, as you could probably see from the film at the beginning. Before we started, there is a kind of community, and it has a kind of extra literary purpose to bring people together. And it is, as I said, also, whatever else, a substitute for living. At least we can engage with language in a kind of interaction, intercourse with the texts that you can do. And that is a kind of gratification, not for everybody, but for some.